Hey everybody, I've got a whole bunch of movies to talk about this time. We're finally back in double digits, yay! I didn't actually review any movies last month. Well, I did the recap of the previous month, and I mentioned some movies, and I showed you some movies, but I didn't actually do any movie reviews. So, if I was going to more accurately title this video, it would be What I Saw in February. What? But let's ignore the minute details and get on with the video. First up, The Imitation Game, the 2014 biopic about Alan Turing, the genius whose machine cracked the Enigma code in World War II. This was an interesting story, made even better with good casting and good writing. Benedict Cumberbatch's lead performance as Turing, the inscrutable, antisocial, tortured soul, is very good. I know that to say Cumberbatch did a good job is a no-brainer for some people who are avid fans, but I haven't actually seen a lot of his movies. But when I do see his work, I'm always impressed by his line reading and his vocal control and how he conveys things about his character, not just with what he says, but how he says it. I also appreciated the smooth blending of three separate timelines, each set in the past and revealing a different part of Turing's life. So often I find that movies that bounce around between storylines and time periods become confusing due to sloppy execution. But here, even without any obvious visual cues, the story remains relatively straightforward. At no point did I feel lost as we switched between flashbacks and flash-forwards, which revealed something about the main character in a way that made the story work as a coherent and cohesive whole. The second movie is also a war film, but an older one, 1948's Fighter Squadron. This is a World War II film focusing on a squadron of fighter pilots, in particular one played by Edmund O'Brien, who doesn't always follow his CO's orders until he's suddenly placed in the unenviable position of being in charge himself. I'm used to seeing World War II movies from the 40s in black and white, so it was nice to see one in Technicolor for a change. This movie turned out to be better than I expected, given the middling IMDb score that I saw beforehand, especially once the main story finally got going. It took a little while to get to that point, and I was worried it was going to focus too much on the goofy antics of a certain sergeant. I've mentioned before that I don't care for too much comedy or too much romance in my war movies. Fortunately, this sergeant did not in fact have a major role, and when he eventually got his comeuppance, I was very satisfied. Movie number 3 was also released in 1948 and is another biopic. The Iron Curtain, which stars a quietly desperate Dana Andrews as Igor Guzenko, a Russian who moved to Canada to work at the Soviet embassy and ended up defecting from the Soviet Union, bringing members of a communist spy ring to light at the risk of his family's safety. This is the last of 3 major cinematic pairings of Dana Andrews and Gene Tierney, following Laura and Where the Sidewalk Ends. Laura is still my favorite with these two, it probably always will be my favorite, but they're good together here as well. It's a tense movie, filmed in the pseudo-documentary style that was popular for spy thrillers at the time, and it takes its subject matter very seriously, though allegedly the story was slightly embellished for dramatic purposes. The end result is an enjoyable, though stressful film of historical relevance, well acted in a subtle way, with small but key performances from those in the supporting cast, including June Havoc and Barry Kroger, who reminded me of Orson Welles in certain ways. Movie number 4 is Ben, the 1972 sequel to the 71 cult favorite Willard, which I talked about in last October's recap. I said in that video that I'd be watching the sequel immediately after, and then I didn't. I apologize to anyone out there who's spent the last 4 months waiting anxiously for my thoughts on Ben. In a nutshell, the first one was better. It's not like Willard was a masterpiece, but the sequel failed to make me care about any of its characters. I didn't especially like or admire any of the characters in the first movie, but at least they had some substance to them. They were lousy people, but there was something to hold on to, something that defined them, even if it was something that just made you hate them. These characters were flat, nondescript, a few of them hardly even acted. How did they make a movie about an army of killer rats so dull? That theme song, though, the version that's sung in the movie by the main character, played by 11-year-old Lee Montgomery, is a little shaky, but the Michael Jackson pop version that plays over the end credits is a classic. The fifth movie is a major tearjerker based on a true story, 2009's Taking Chance, which stars Kevin Bacon as a pencil-pushing Marine who volunteers to escort the body of a fallen soldier back home. I'm sure there's no further explanation required for why this was such a sad movie. It was rough, but I think it was worth it. It's a modern war movie, which is different for me, but there are no scenes of warfare or really any specific mentions of which war is being fought, and that gives it a powerful sense of timelessness. The film details all the steps involved in receiving a soldier's body from overseas and prepping it for burial. I had no idea, had never even really contemplated all the small details and requirements in this process, and it was incredibly moving the amount of care and respect shown to the fallen soldier by strangers all along the journey home. Movie number 6 is The Mothman Prophecies, a psychological horror thriller from 2002 starring Richard Gere and Laura Linney, adapted from the book by John A. Keel, which is allegedly based on a true story. This movie was okay, but it wasn't quite what I wanted. See, when I was in 9th grade, I had to choose a topic for a major research project, and I was divided between the Shakespearean authorship controversy and cryptozoology, which is the study of creatures whose existence has not been proven, like Bigfoot, the Chupacabra, and the Loch Ness Monster. I went with cryptozoology because, much as I love Shakespeare, the other just seemed more fun, and it was. One of my favorite cryptids, though I admit it's one of the less likely to exist, is the Mothman. Reading the accounts of sightings of this tall, winged, red-eyed creature gave me the creepy crawlies and kept me up pretty late one night. A couple months ago, I noticed a 2017 documentary called The Mothman of Point Pleasant listed on Amazon Prime, and I was very excited to watch it, but when I finally got around to it, it wasn't free anymore. But I was already in the mood to watch a Mothman movie, albeit one that didn't cost me anything, so to fill the void, I went for the 2002 film instead. The thing is, The Mothman Prophecies ultimately has a lot more to do with supernatural, paranormal stuff than the eerie, unexplained sightings of monsters that I wanted. The movie has some good spooky moments and rising tension, but it's all pretty inconclusive, and I just wasn't interested in a story about precognition and a chaotic neutral godlike entity. So I wasn't super into this. Some of the atmosphere was fine though, and I liked the way the camera swooped around and zoomed overhead, as if from the Mothman's point of view. To mix things up, the 7th film is a silent one, the 1925 adaptation of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's The Lost World, which I'm still intending to read sometime, starring Wallace Beery and featuring the groundbreaking special effects work of Willis O'Brien, whose stop-motion animation revolutionized the science fiction genre. Considering that the movie was only about 65 minutes long, I was thinking that it took kind of a long time to get to the good stuff, with the dinosaurs. But wait, it turns out that this is one of many silent films that has different run times depending on which version you watch, and the copy I rented had the shorter version. About half an hour of footage was missing, so no wonder the ending seemed ridiculously abrupt. Despite all that, though, I liked the movie. The special effects are great, of course, and it's surprisingly violent, thanks to this one jerk of a dinosaur who likes to attack the others in very vicious ways. I'm amazed there can still be such a variety of dinosaurs living on this plateau, considering how many we see die in combat with the Allosaurus or whatever it is. Not sure what's up with the ape-man, though. Did he want to scare the expedition away, or lure them in? Keep them there forever? Kill them? Befriend them? No idea. Maybe his intent is more clear in the longer version. Movie number 8 is The Little Riders, a 1996 adaptation of a children's war story, The Little Riders by Margareta Shemin, which I talked about briefly a few months ago. It made a pretty good movie, as I'd expected it would, telling the story of Joanne, a young American girl living with her grandparents during the German occupation of Holland. Actors Paul Scofield and Malcolm McDowell are the two most recognizable faces, Scofield playing the grandfather and McDowell playing a nasty German commander, a character added specifically for the movie. I think on the whole, I liked the book better. The movie added extra drama and realism, while the book, clearly meant for children, was softer around the edges. I appreciate the film's reality, but I so liked the way the book presented the story and those versions of the characters, and I missed them here. Movie number 9 is a mystery comedy romance from 1945 called Lady on a Train, about a young woman who witnesses a murder while looking out her window at a train stop. I sought this one out simply because I saw some people on Twitter talking about how much they enjoy Deanna Durbin, and I realized I'd never seen one of her movies. This one was highly recommended as a good Christmassy film, and while I didn't watch it at Christmas time, it's still winter. I really got a kick out of Durbin's amazing costumes, which were more fashionable than practical, her ever-changing hairstyles, her singing, and it helped that she sang 2 songs I'm very familiar with, Silent Night and Night and Day, and a third that was very catchy. Her sense of comedic timing and delivery were fresh and amusing. This is a fun movie that's sometimes focused on the mystery, sometimes focused on anything but. Maybe it drags on a little toward the end, but it never loses its sense of humor. It was as entertaining trying to figure out who Durbin's character was going to end up with as it was whodunit, and with a supporting cast that included familiar faces like Ralph Bellamy, Dan Duryea, Edward Everett Horton, and George Coulouris, this was a jolly good time. Maybe my favorite of the month. And now I've got to follow that with 2018's The Cloverfield Paradox. In a way, this is exciting. I'm reviewing a movie less than a month after its release, and that's a first. I saw the ad for this direct-to-Netflix movie on TV like everybody else who watched the Super Bowl, and I was mildly enthused. But I didn't get my hopes up too high. Remember, I had mixed feelings about the first 2 Cloverfield movies. I liked 10 Cloverfield Lane quite a lot, in spite of the tacked-on final section that ties it to the first movie, and I thought the first movie was just okay. Too much shaky cam and incredibly annoying characters. As it turns out, I didn't think Paradox was as awful and disappointing as a lot of upset people are saying it is, but I definitely didn't think it was very good. The characters are pretty flat, the gross-out stuff is disturbing, but not enough so to make it a truly memorable experience, and a lot of what happens with no rhyme or reason. And I still don't get how the 3 movies fit together. I have heard a few explanations, and frankly, none of them totally work. Probably because this wasn't originally a Cloverfield movie. They just threw that in there last minute, so no wonder it doesn't make sense. My mom liked it well enough, though. She's pretty much on board for any space movie, especially if it's scary, and The Last Shot made her laugh. She's more forgiving and good-humored when it comes to subpar sci-fi movies, and sometimes she gives me a much-needed reality check, and I think that's something that we could all use now and then when we get a little too worked up talking about movies that didn't meet our expectations. Movie number 11 was D-Day, the 6th of June. This is a 1956 war movie that sounds like it's about the D-Day invasion, but it's not really. That only happens in the last act. This was mainly a flashback-driven love triangle story, which is not the kind of war movie I seek out, but oh well. Robert Taylor and Richard Todd play an American soldier and an English soldier, respectively, both in love with Dana Winter. I wasn't sure which guy I wanted her to end up with, but the fact that Taylor's character was married threw a monkey wrench in it for me. I would have enjoyed their star-crossed romance a lot more if it hadn't been for the infidelity of the situation. I was pretty surprised by the movie's loose moral tone overall. It felt more like a 60s war film in that respect, with the implication that all servicemen overseas are cheating on their wives, and those wives know it and are cheating on them. Now, I'm not naive. I know a lot of people were unfaithful to their spouses during the war, but the fact that everyone in this movie treats marital infidelity like a foregone conclusion really bothered me. Anyway, at a certain point you come to realize there's no possibility of a happy ending for everyone involved, so then you wait for something awful to happen, and it does, very randomly, almost comically done. I don't know, I had mixed feelings about this one. And the last movie, number 12, is a Charlie Chaplin film, a black comedy from 1947 titled Monsieur Verdoux, in which Chaplin plays a man who supports his family through the Great Depression by marrying and murdering rich women. It's a comedy, but it wasn't quite as funny as I expected, or rather, the comedy wasn't evenly spread out. The most humorous scenes are concentrated in the middle section when Verdoux's plans start to break down. Nearly every outrageous scene with Madame Bonheur, played by Martha Ray, and her maid Annette had me laughing. But though Chaplin is still Chaplin with all his quintessential quirks and mannerisms, the first and final sections were quite serious. Verdoux reveals a cynical, desperate streak, which makes you stop and realize that the character you met in the beginning was only a facade, an exaggerated role played for financial advantage. All in all, the comedy is not the main point. The desperation and cynicism grows, and the movie ends on a dark note after Chaplin offers some critical thoughts on capitalism and war. It's important to remember that about Chaplin. There's usually more than just slapstick at work. He's almost always making a statement. So all along, Chaplin intended his film to be more than just a simple, morbid comedy. Which is fine. It's just not what I was expecting, and it makes me feel a little unsophisticated to admit that I liked those funny parts in the middle the most. So that's the February list. I'm pretty happy that I had more movies to share with you this time, but wow, it makes the video much longer. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the list and maybe found some interesting movies to check out for yourself, and I hope that you'll stay tuned for whatever I end up doing next week. I haven't decided yet. Thanks for watching!